I never planned to stay long on that coast. My trip was meant to be short, just a few frames of the rocky shoreline before moving inland. But from the first moment I saw the lighthouse standing alone against the horizon, I felt drawn toward it. Its white tower rose above the cliffs, stripped of paint by salt and wind, the glass at the top broken in several places. No ships passed by anymore, yet the building still looked like it was waiting for someone. I parked my car by the edge of a dirt road and carried my bag across the uneven ground. The air smelled of algae and rust, and the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below echoed through the empty landscape. I checked my watch. Evening was coming fast. The closer I walked, the more details I noticed. The wooden door at the base hung crooked, the hinges red with corrosion. Beside the entrance, a stone plaque still bore the year of construction, though half the numbers were chipped away. I pushed the door open, and it creaked loud enough to startle the gulls outside. Inside, the air was heavy. Dust swirled in the narrow beam of sunlight that fell through a crack in the wall. The main hall was small, with a spiral staircase winding upward. To one side, I found a desk covered in papers. Most were blank, eaten by moisture, but underneath the pile I uncovered a stack of old journals. I sat on the floor, brushing the dirt off the cover. The first entry was dated almost a century ago. The handwriting was uneven, but still readable. It described daily routines, weather conditions, and notes about ships passing the coast. At first, it seemed like nothing unusual, the kind of record any keeper would make. But after a few pages, the tone shifted. The writer spoke of sailors who vanished without leaving a trace, ships that never arrived at port, men who stepped onto the rocks below and were never seen again. The keeper wrote about hearing voices at night, calling his name from the water. He claimed the light in the tower turned on by itself, guiding ships into the rocks. I kept reading, my fingers trembling as I turned the damp pages. The last entries were short, written in rushed strokes. They spoke of footsteps above the keeper's room at night, even though he was alone. He wrote that the lighthouse wanted company. I closed the journal and looked around the room. The silence pressed against my ears. Then, somewhere above me, I heard the faint thud of movement. A footstep. I froze. The staircase leading upward was only a few meters away. My camera hung at my side, heavier than ever. I told myself it was the wind or a bird trapped inside, but my body refused to believe it. Slowly, I stood and lifted my bag. The sound came again, clearer, deliberate. Someone was on the floor above me. My throat felt dry, but I forced myself to step onto the first iron stair. The metal groaned beneath my weight. I climbed carefully, my eyes fixed on the shadows twisting across the wall. The steps echoed louder as I rose, until I reached the door to the keeper's quarters. The door stood slightly open. I pushed it, and it revealed a small room with a broken bed frame and shelves collapsed against the wall. Papers littered the floor. The window was boarded shut, but a pale light seeped through the cracks. I bent down to pick up another page, when suddenly a noise struck from above. The roof. Someone was walking across it. I tilted my head back, heart hammering. The tower stretched higher, ending at the lantern room. A weak glow flickered there. The journals had warned about this. And yet the lighthouse had no electricity. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, staring at the faint glow above. The air turned colder, and I felt a draft pulling me toward the spiral that led up to the lantern room. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something stronger held me there. Curiosity, or maybe the same pull that had brought me to the lighthouse in the first place. I climbed higher. Each step rang against the iron frame, echoing up through the hollow tower. The light grew stronger with every turn of the staircase. It flickered, weak and uneven, but steady enough to spill across the walls. At the final landing, I stopped. The door to the lantern room was closed, yet light leaked through the cracks around its edges. I raised my hand to push it open, but before I touched it, I heard the sound again. Slow, measured footsteps crossing the wooden floor on the other side. I forced myself inside. The lantern room was almost empty. Shards of broken glass lay scattered across the boards, and the great lamp in the center stood dark and lifeless. The light I had seen was not from the lamp itself, but from a thin flame floating just above it. It burned without fuel, swaying as though moved by breath. Then I realized I was not alone. In the corner of the room stood a figure. Not solid, but not transparent either. A man, tall and gaunt, wearing what remained of a uniform coat. His face was pale and hollow, eyes like deep water. He looked at me, and though his lips never moved, I heard his voice inside my head. "You should not be here." My chest tightened. I wanted to speak, to explain, but no words came out. The figure stepped closer, and the boards creaked beneath him, though he weighed nothing. He glanced at my camera, then at the journals sticking out of my bag. They left me, all of them. The sea took them, but I stayed. I keep the light. I keep them here. The flame above the lamp flared brighter, and for an instant I saw shapes moving inside it. Faces, twisted and silent, pressing against the fire as though trapped within. My stomach turned. These were the sailors the journal had described. The figure moved again, now only a few steps away. I could see the outline of his bones beneath the ghostly skin. He raised a hand, pointing at the window. Outside, the night had fully fallen. Yet across the waves, I saw the impossible. A ship, drifting toward the rocks, guided by the glow from the tower. "There will always be more," he said. "They come, and they stay." I shook my head and stepped back, nearly tripping over the broken glass. My mind raced. I needed to get out, but the only way down was past him. Then the light in the flame sputtered. The figures inside pressed harder against it, their faces turning to me. I heard faint whispers, like voices carried on the tide. They did not belong to the keeper. They were begging, pleading, "Let us go." The ghost's face twisted in anger. His eyes burned, and the flame swelled, flooding the room with a blinding glow. The sound of footsteps thundered from all around, circling me though I saw no one else. The lighthouse trembled under the weight of something far larger than its walls. I turned and ran. I shoved past the keeper, my body colliding with nothing yet feeling resistance, like moving through thick water. He reached for me, but I broke free and hurled myself down the spiral staircase. My boots clanged against the iron as I descended, heart pounding louder than the wind outside. When I burst into the main hall, the journals slipped from my bag, scattering across the floor. I didn't stop to gather them. The footsteps above followed me, heavy and relentless. The glow poured down the staircase, chasing me like a tide of fire. I slammed the front door open and stumbled into the night. The cold air hit me like a wall. I sprinted across the rocks toward the dirt road, not daring to look back. But before I reached my car, I glanced over my shoulder. The lighthouse stood in silence. The light in its lantern room burned steady, brighter than any modern lamp, sweeping across the waves. The beam passed over me, and for a second I felt the weight of eyes pressing against my back. I jumped into the car, turned the key, and drove without stopping. The road twisted away from the cliffs, and soon the tower disappeared from sight. Yet the glow lingered in the rearview mirror until the last bend. I never returned to that coast. I told no one what I had seen, and I never developed the few photographs I had taken before night fell. But even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps above my ceiling, and when I look out my window, far in the distance across the dark horizon, I see a light sweeping over the sea. The lighthouse is still waiting. The first time I stepped into the asylum, the air hit me like a wall. It smelled of rust, mold, and something that reminded me of burnt paper. My friends and I had driven 3 hours to reach it, chasing the thrill of exploring a place that had been locked away for over a century. There were 5 of us that night. Clara held the flashlight. Victor carried the camera. Leah had a backpack filled with snacks and batteries. Jonah walked behind me, quiet, but always recording everything on his phone. The asylum loomed in front of us, its brick walls cracked, its windows boarded up. Everyone said the place was cursed. That was the point. We wanted to see for ourselves. The front gate was chained, but Victor had already found a hole in the fence. The silence inside was heavier than the night air. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of our shoes on the gravel. When we reached the main doors, Clara laughed nervously. "If we get locked in here, I'm blaming you." She pointed at me. I pushed the door, and to our surprise, it creaked open. The hall was long, lined with broken wheelchairs and rusted gurneys. Paint peeled from the walls like dead skin. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, and dust floated in the beams. Someone whispered, but it wasn't from us. Leah froze. "Did you hear that?" We all stopped. There was nothing for a second. Then the faint sound of footsteps above us. Victor grinned. "Perfect. That's exactly the kind of thing that will look great on video." We climbed the stairs to the second floor. The railing was loose, and the floor groaned under our weight. It felt as if the building itself was warning us not to continue. At the end of the corridor, we found a locked room. The door was covered in scratches. Clara pressed her ear against it. Her face drained of color. "Voices," she whispered. We all leaned in, faint murmurs. They were not clear, but they were there. Jonah held up his phone. Recording. Victor tried the handle again, but the lock held. His flashlight beam caught the wall next to the door. Words had been carved into the plaster, deep and uneven. "Do not leave." Further down, more messages appeared. "Stay with us. We wait." Some were written in what looked like dried rust, but the patterns were too fresh, too sharp. Leah's voice shook. "That wasn't here 100 years ago." The corridor felt alive. Each step we took echoed as if dozens of feet were following us. Shadows shifted across doors that were shut tight. I swear I saw a hand pull back from a barred window. Then the sound hit us, screaming. One voice, raw and sharp, tearing through the silence. It was Jonah. He had been behind us only seconds ago, but when we turned, the space was empty. His phone lay on the ground. The screen cracked, still recording. Clara screamed his name. Victor swung his flashlight wildly down the hall, but there was nothing. No door had opened. No window had broken. He was just gone. And yet, the screams didn't stop. They echoed down the corridor, bouncing off the walls, coming from everywhere at once. We stood frozen, not knowing if we should run or go after him. That was the moment I realized we were no longer exploring an abandoned building. The asylum was exploring us. Clara grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. "We have to go after him," she said, but her voice was shaking. Victor shined his light down the corridor. "He can't be far." His face said something else. He knew what I knew. Jonah had not just walked away. We followed the sound of his screams. They rose and fell, echoing in directions that made no sense, sometimes behind us, sometimes above, sometimes right next to our ears. Every door we passed was locked, yet shadows moved under the cracks. Leah stopped and pointed at the wall. Fresh words were appearing, not carved, written in something dark and wet. "Join us." Her hand trembled. "This wasn't here a second ago." Victor tried to stay calm, but his flashlight beam shook. "It's a trick of the light. It has to be." The hall narrowed as we went deeper. Doors on both sides rattled as if someone was trying to break free. I smelled rot mixed with iron. Clara's breathing was fast, shallow. She whispered Jonah's name, but the only answer was another scream that twisted it into laughter. We reached a room with no door. Inside, the walls were covered in more writing. Thousands of words layered over each other, some scratched deep, some fresh and dripping, phrases repeated. "We are here. Do not leave. Stay forever." At the center of the room was a chair with straps still hanging loose. The leather looked new, as if someone had used it recently. Then we saw Jonah, or at least we thought we did. His figure flickered in the far corner, half in shadow. He reached out a hand. His face was pale, his mouth open in a silent scream. Clara rushed forward, but the moment she crossed the threshold, the figure dissolved. Gone. Only the empty corner remained. That broke something in her. She fell to her knees sobbing. Leah pulled her up, whispering to keep moving, to not stop. The air grew colder the deeper we went. Our breaths came out in white clouds. We reached a stairwell that descended into the basement. The screams were louder there, almost deafening. Victor shook his head. "If we go down, we're not coming back." I wanted to agree, but the pull was stronger than reason. Something wanted us below. We descended. The steps were damp, slippery with moss. The basement smelled like earth and rusted metal. At the bottom, our lights caught rows of cells. Heavy bars, small windows, chains hanging from the walls. Every cell was empty, yet whispers rose from inside each one. Some called our names. Others begged us not to leave. One voice laughed, sharp and broken, until it blended with Jonah's scream again. Clara backed away, shaking her head. "This place is alive." Then a slam. The stairwell door shut above us. The sound echoed through the basement like a final judgment. Victor rushed to it, pulling and kicking, but it didn't move. Leah whispered, "We're trapped." Something shifted in the far cell. Not a shadow, not a trick. A figure stepped forward, dragging chains that left marks on the floor. Its face was obscured, but I knew it was watching us. Behind it, more shapes moved, dozens, all waiting. The whispers grew into a chorus. They spoke in unison, the same words carved across the asylum walls. "Stay with us," Clara screamed. Leah clutched my arm. Victor lifted his camera with shaking hands, as if proof would save us. The last thing I remember clearly is the iron bars creaking open on their own, one by one. The asylum was no longer abandoned. It had never been. I arrived in the late afternoon when the sun was already lowering behind the hills. The map showed a road that cut through a deserted region, and curiosity pushed me farther than I had planned. That was when I found the village. The first thing I noticed was silence. No birds, no insects, no sound of the wind. The houses stood in rows, their windows open, curtains faded but still hanging. Doors were half closed, as if people had left in a hurry and never came back. I stepped closer. A clay jug lay broken at the threshold of one house. Inside, plates still sat on a table, covered in dust but untouched. A chair had fallen, frozen in time. In another yard, clothes hung on a rope, gently moving though the air was completely still. I kept walking, the weight of the emptiness pressing on me. Every corner carried a trace of sudden departure. An open notebook on a desk, a child's toy on the floor, a lantern set on a shelf as if it would be needed later. I tried to imagine the people who once lived here. Families eating together, children running along the path, someone fetching water from the well in the center of the square. Now all that remained were objects, mute evidence of an interrupted life. The locals from nearby towns had told stories of a strange sickness that spread here years ago. No one knew what it was, only that it came quickly. The survivors left everything behind and never returned. I thought it was superstition mixed with rumor, but as I stood there, the truth felt heavier. The evening fell quickly. The colors drained from the world, leaving shadows stretching across the ground. I felt uneasy, but I decided to stay until morning. I had a small flashlight, a bottle of water, and my backpack. I chose a house near the edge of the village, one with a roof still intact. Inside, the air smelled of dry wood and dust. I set my bag on the floor and sat by the wall, listening. At first it was only silence. Then, little by little, faint sounds began to break it. A bell, high and distant. Then another, closer. I froze. The sound repeated, like someone walking with small chimes tied to their clothes. Next came laughter. Children, playful but far away. The voices shifted, moving from one side of the street to the other, though I saw nothing when I looked out the window. My chest tightened. I knew no one lived here. I had checked every house I passed. Still, the village felt full, as if its residents had returned at night. I tried to convince myself it was the wind carrying distant noises. But there was no wind. The air was still, heavy and pressing. The clothes outside still hung, barely moving, yet the laughter continued. Then footsteps echoed in the street. Slow, deliberate, approaching my shelter. I held my breath, clutching the flashlight, though I did not dare turn it on. The steps stopped right outside the door. I waited, eyes fixed on the shadow beneath the gap of the doorway. For a moment I was sure I saw it darken, as if someone stood there, but the door never opened. Minutes passed, long and unbearable. Then the bells sounded again, drifting away. The laughter followed, fading into the distance. I should have left then, but my legs felt locked. Something inside me whispered that leaving was no longer possible. The air carried a weight that pressed me down, as if the village itself had closed its grip around me. I tried to sleep, though I knew it would not come. Every creak of the wooden beams above sounded like a whisper. Every gust of dust in the air felt alive. When I finally closed my eyes, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, very close, speaking in a language I did not recognize. It came from inside the room. I opened my eyes, but there was no one. The air shimmered, faint outlines moving just beyond my sight. Shapes, like people standing in corners, watching. And I understood. The villagers never left. They were still here, bound to the place, replaying the lives they lost. And now they had noticed me. The night stretched on without end. I sat pressed against the wall, every sound pulling me deeper into fear. The whispers grew clearer. I could not understand the words, but the tone was urgent, commanding, as if they were telling me to listen. The air grew colder. My breath came out in faint clouds. Then I saw movement in the corner. A figure formed from the shadows, thin and pale, its face blurred. It looked like a woman holding something close to her chest, rocking as if it were a child. But there was no child, only emptiness. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to move. The figure turned its head toward me. Though I could not see eyes, I felt its gaze pierce me. My chest tightened, and my heart pounded so loud I thought it would burst. The floor creaked outside the door. More steps. Many. They gathered, circling the house. The whispers became a chorus, overlapping, voices of men, women, children. Then the door slowly opened on its own. Shapes poured in. Not solid, not fully visible, but enough to see faces twisted with longing. They surrounded me, their presence heavy, pressing against my skin. I heard bells again, this time inside the room, ringing near my ear. I shouted that I meant no harm, that I would leave, but the voices only grew stronger. Then, as if answering me, one clear sentence rose above the rest, spoken in perfect clarity. "You cannot leave." The weight of the words crushed me. My mind raced. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on, the beam cutting through the shadows. For a moment the figures recoiled, retreating toward the corners. But they did not vanish, they only waited. I rushed outside, my light trembling as I ran through the street. The houses loomed on either side, windows glowing faintly, though no lamps burned inside. Curtains shifted as if someone watched me from every room. The path out of the village stretched ahead, but when I ran toward it, the way bent and curved back into the square. No matter where I turned, I ended up at the same place. The well stood at the center, and around it the shadows gathered like an audience. I screamed in frustration, but the sound died quickly in the thick air. Then I saw them. Children, transparent and pale, sitting on the edge of the well, swinging their legs as if alive. They smiled at me, but their eyes were hollow. One of them spoke softly. "Stay with us." The ground beneath me trembled. The houses creaked as if alive, roofs shifting, doors opening one by one. The entire village seemed to breathe. I understood then. The sickness had taken their bodies, but not their souls. The village held them, refusing to let them go. And now it held me too. I dropped to my knees, staring at the dust-covered stones. My mind searched for an escape, but the truth was clear. The villagers were not keeping me out, they were keeping me in. The laughter returned, now louder, surrounding me from every street. The bells chimed in rhythm with my heartbeat. The whispers pressed against my ears, filling my head with their endless plea. I realized I would never see the outside world again. My story would end here, lost among the others, another voice in the chorus. The village had chosen me. And as the figures closed in, their hands reaching out, I finally understood why no traveler ever spoke of this place.